And so, that's what we're dealing with right now. But before we get into that, I want to talk about this idea of Adar, right? And the holiness of this month and how we're kind of like in a position where we're kind of like towards like we only have so many more days of Adar. So because of all of the again, the perpetuation preparation for um, Purim, we kind of like didn't really go as deeply into Adar. So I want to spend a little bit of time with that. And I have excuse me, a couple of videos that kind of like build like a kind of a mini story around just the month in general and kind of like different ideas on how to perceive it. So we're going to start with the structure of the calendar itself, like a very short video, only a couple minutes. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit, and then we'll go into the actual month of Adar, meaning that the name Adar and that structure. And then we're going to go into the next stage, which is the actual month and what's inside of it, right? All right. So hold on. Oh, no. Okay, hold on one second. Okay. Okay. So anyway, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna do like what we're doing now. We're going to an intro into the explanation of Adar, right? So at some point, you guys are gonna have teachers, students, and you guys being teachers, you're gonna have to look at the situation and say like, how do I explain these amazing concepts that you guys have already learned or learned, through our studies together? You're gonna have to sit back and say, well, how do I explain that to people I come in contact with? How do I explain this concept? So that's kind of idea. So how do we explain the idea of the month of Adar, right? We only have so much time in Adar, so much energy left. We think about Adar throughout the year. I mean, we think about Purim, all these things, but how do we connect to it, right? And so that's what we're going to do, a series of very short videos. And these different stages of short videos are going to allow us to to have a conceptual roadmap on this month of Adar and have a structure, right? And then after that, we're going to go and learn a little bit about Lekha on this leadership series that we're going on, self leadership, self accountability, and we're on Parsha. Actually, we're up to Parsha Lekha, right, which is a fourth Parsha. And if you remember, just as a frame of reference, that we learned in the first three parshiot in the Torah. What the first one was Adam, right? And so Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he he hones in on this idea because we're in his leadership series, right? And so he says in the first one, he talks about the idea of taking responsibility, right? And through the first three parshiot, he gives different examples of that, of not taking leadership. So one aspect of not taking leadership was Adam and his wife and the serpent, right? So no one took accountability, right, for their actions, right? And then you have another example of man and his brother, right? First is man in his house, but then man with his brother, right? And then so you have the situation with Cain and Hevel, where he didn't take accountability for for his um, for his he didn't take accountability for his issues with the sins that he created. And then he brings the idea of Noah, which Noah was totally righteous and he did great things, but he did not take accountability or responsibility for his community at large. So we have those three different dynamics, and then so we're going to go into Lekha. But before we get into Lekha, we're going to go into this concept of Adar because we're in the middle of Adar. We're in the jacuzzi now. We're in the energy. We're in the kedusha. And wait, did I even do it right? Okay, hold on. Oh yeah, okay, you guys are there. Okay, cool, cool, cool. All right, just want to make sure you guys are there with me. Okay, so here we are. We're starting with the concept of the Jewish calendar. And obviously, I know you guys read Mind of the Black Jew, and you saw how amazingly of a description the author of the book, which happens to be me, laid out for the calendar. But again, we're going to go over this idea here.
Have you ever wondered how the Jewish calendar works and how it came about? The Jewish month begins with a thin crescent. The moon grows until it is full, wanes until it cannot be seen, and eventually reappears. This cycle takes approximately 29 and a half days. Since a month needs to consist of complete days, a month in the Jewish calendar is sometimes 29 days, and sometimes 30 days. The solar orbit consists of 365 and a quarter days. The difference between 12 lunar months and the solar year is almost 11 days. The Torah, however, states that Passover must be in springtime. If no adjustment were made, Passover would occur 11 days earlier each year, eventually drifting into winter, then fall, summer, and spring again. The Jewish calendar thus presents two challenges. Who determines whether a month is 29 or 30 days? How can the lunar and solar cycles be coordinated and balanced? In biblical and Mishnaic times, the Sanhedrin was responsible for determining the months and years. On the 30th day of every month, they would cross-examine witnesses who claimed to have seen the new moon. If the witnesses' accounts were corroborated, that day would be declared the first of the month. The previous month was now retroactively determined to have had only 29 days. If no testimony were accepted, the Sanhedrin would declare the following day the first of the new month. In order to balance the solar and lunar cycles, the Sanhedrin periodically inserted an extra month into a year, creating a Shana Mu'uberet, or pregnant year, more commonly known as a leap year. This was the situation until the middle of the 4th century, at which time the Romans forcibly disbanded the Sanhedrin. Hillel II, the last leader of the Sanhedrin and a descendant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, anticipated this. Therefore, before the Sanhedrin was disbanded, they established a fixed calendar for posterity. The Sanhedrin declared and established all future new months and leap years, granting the fixed calendar the same validity as the original system. To this day, Jews throughout the world use this sophisticated structure created by Rabbi Hillel. Throughout the centuries, the calendar has been one of the backbones of Jewish unity, as it has ensured that Jews the world over celebrate and observe the Jewish holidays on the very same day.
Okay, so I'm enjoying some sunflower seeds as we watch that. So the thing is, it seems like so. Yeah, I mean, it's a basic understanding. The one thing I would say that the system that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi um, um, put into articulation was a passed down tradition that existed since the time of Babylon, and he wasn't the last. Um, he wasn't the last rabbi of the Sanhedrin either. He was during a generation of the pairs, right? And it was the pairs was the generation right before the Tanaim. Anyway, so there was, it was. I'm not saying it was good. I mean, everything he said was fine. I just want to be clear that it was not like somebody just invented something, but rather he his um his school of thought, the Hillel and Shammai, were two different schools of thought during that time. And so his school of thought, this is the way that they articulated the calendar system, and then that became the predominant way of doing that. Any questions, any thoughts? Because if not, we'll keep going. But we could do it if you have a question on it.
No, not at all.
Okay, cool.
No, sir. I'm good.
All right, great. All right, so we're gonna keep pushing it. It gets better. It gets better. This is like, you got to realize. I mean, I come from Hollywood. You know what I mean? So, we got to tell stories, right? All right. So, Hold on. Okay. Alrighty.
Over explaining simple things.
Okay.
What does Adar mean in Hebrew? If you're curious about the meaning of the Hebrew month Adar, you're about to uncover some fascinating facts. Let's start by understanding where the name Adar comes from and what it signifies. The name Adar has its roots in ancient Babylon. It is derived from the Babylonian verb adaru, which means to be darkened or eclipsed. However, when Jewish scholars adopted this name during the Babylonian exile, they linked it to Hebrew words that carry different meanings. One of these words is the Hebrew verb adar, which means to be majestic or wide. In Hebrew, the word adir is closely related to adar and means strength or power. This connection highlights the theme of strength and resilience that is deeply embedded in the month of Adar. Another Hebrew verb associated with Adar is hadar, which means to honor, adorn, or glorify. This verb adds a layer of significance to Adar, emphasizing themes of glory and honor. So what does Adar mean in Hebrew? It can be interpreted in a few ways. It can mean darkened or eclipsed from its Babylonian origins, but in Jewish tradition, it is more commonly associated with strength and majesty. This dual meaning reflects the complex and rich history of the Jewish people, particularly during the month of Adar, which is celebrated for its joy and the miraculous events of Purim. The Talmud even states that when Adar enters, joy increases, highlighting the positive and hopeful spirit of this month. In summary, Adar in Hebrew is a month that embodies strength, majesty, and joy, making it a unique and significant time in the Jewish calendar.
Okay. So,
בתשע שנים האחרונות במכון הניג, אנחנו יודעים לזהות למה...
Israeli commercials, huh? All right. So, okay. So the thing is like this. On one level, it's like, okay, you guys are like, hey, we know about this. We could have looked this up ourselves. You know, what's going on? Why do we got to learn this? Rabbi Mordecai, what's the point? What are you trying to do? What I'm saying is that if you wanted to explain the month, any month in this energy, this is the process that you have to go through to someone else, right? You guys have had years of study. Maybe you already knew these things. Maybe you already knew all the things of Adar. I'm assuming you knew some of these things already. And I'm assuming there's things that you didn't. Also about the Hebrew calendar. I'm sure the things that you knew, but you didn't. But take the person who's off, you know, when I say off the streets, anybody. It could be a person who's a business leader, a guy, you know, who may not even have a job, right? And I'm saying, and you want to be able to talk to them about the light force of the creator. And how every month has a certain amount of light. So how do you do it? Okay, so this is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about Torah on the grassroots level, where you can sit down with somebody and say, hey, you know what? Here, look at this video, 2 minutes, Hebrew calendar. Okay, I got it. The Hebrew calendar works this way, blah, blah, blah. They don't understand all the idiosyncrasies, this, that, whatever, blah, blah. All right, fine. They understand all that, but they understand, you know, the fact that there is a system and there's a school of thought. Okay, boom, boom. And then you go into this particular month. In this case, it's Adar. So you find a video, a little short video. Okay, hey, this is what Adar is. This is what the Hebrew word means, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So here's the third phase. Hold on. I'm making it easy. You know what I'm saying? Uh, so random. People call me and say, hey, you know, think about having Shabbat. I want you to come. I'm like, all right, cool. They'd be like, well, I don't know if I'm feeling well. All right. Anyways, I'm trying to get off this screen. How do I get out of here? Oh, great. All right, hold on. All right. Anyways, hold on. I'm trying to fix this thing. Okay. All right. Fine. All right. Okay. So where we're at right now. Okay. Hold on. Okay. So where we're at now is so we're gonna go now that we created the idea of the calendar, then the next idea is to be able to go and say, hey, you know, now we want to go a little bit more deeper inside. No, it is. Hold on one second. Jeez. All right, fine. There it is. All right. All right. So, anyways, so here's a more in-depth understanding of this month. Okay, and this will be more like, as you would say, Kabbalistic, this or whatever, these types of things. But the point is the same. This will be kind of like the culmination of energizing that. And sometimes people, like, you can explain to them all you want, right? They know you, they connect to you, but when they hear someone else says it, it has a certain power. You know what I mean? That's why I don't really spend a lot of time talking about myself and these type of things. I give over text and I talk about Chief Rabbi Pinchas. You know what I'm saying? Those are my main things, because that's how people understand things. If I'm just saying, hey, listen to me, I got all the answer solutions, it doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? Moshe never talked about himself. You know what I'm saying? And he's the greatest leader of all time. So, anyways, so with that being said, we're going to this next thing. This rabbi who's speaking, actually, I know him. He actually used to teach in Los Angeles when I was first starting my journey. But he kind of like broke away and doing his own thing. And in Israel, I ran into him a couple of times. I'd say hi to him, but he was he was in a different space. I wasn't at that time. So in the Kabbalah, I was more like in like the yeshiva system, that type of thing. All right. Anyways, but he's a good man, and he's a good man, but he's a great teacher. His name is Shaul. So, all right, let's go. Okay.
Live Kabbalah is a non-profit organization founded for the distribution of the wisdom of Kabbalah and its values. Learning the original principles of this wisdom can reconnect us with the true values of our society, including the belief in the dignity and freedom of man, democracy, and the freedom of speech.
Hello everyone, this month we're celebrating the month of Adar, which is the month of Pisces. In the biblical calendar, the month of Pisces is the 12th and the last month of the year. The first month is Aries. In the Bible, you read in Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapter 12, in the beginning. So, Pisces is the 12th month. That makes it a very special month because it's the last one. What's special about this month? Because the 12th means the last one. The last one means the bottom. The bottom is, if you learn Kabbalah, is Malchut, the recipient. So, what's so special about it? Everything here is amplified. Now, the month of Pisces is a month of bliss. There's a saying, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha. When the month of Adar is coming, this is a time for a lot of joy. Why joy in the month of Adar? Miracles happen in this month. This is the month. In the full moon of this month, we celebrate the holiday of Purim, the miracle of Purim that happened in Persia some 26 centuries ago. The book of Esther is a story of that miracle that happened and connected to the energy of the month of Adar. By the way, the miracle happened, the beginning of this miracle happens in the month of Aries, in Nisan. The manifestation, and that's our secret, is in Adar. Adar is a month of manifestation. What can be manifested? What is the power that can be manifested in this month? Like everything, it's a big power. It has two sides, giving us our free will to choose the dark side or the light side. Now, to understand a little bit about this month, because this is a short explanation, if you want the extended explanation and study, you can learn on the site, either from reading or from listening. Now, the Book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah by Abraham the Patriarch, says that this month, the month of Pisces, is being ruled by the planet Jupiter. In Hebrew, Tzedek, justice. Now, Jupiter, according to the Book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah, is the letter Gimel. And Gimel means sharing. Sharing with whom? With the ones who are poor. And the poor is the dal, dalet. So Gimel and dalet, Gomel dalim, sharing with the poor, is the same letters as dag, fish, which is the name of this month, the month of the fish. What is the connection? In the Kabbalistic tradition, we know that the fish, and many other traditions by the way, is a symbol of protection from evil eye. The symbol of protection. Why? Because the fish are the symbol of hiding. As the saying is, that there is bliss only in what is covered from the eye. Whatever is exposed does not have bliss anymore. If you really want something to be successful, cover it up. You don't have to go and tell to everyone. As long as it's covered, it's easier to grow. Can you imagine if the belly of a mother, pregnant mother, will be transparent and we will see the child growing within? It won't have the same success of growth. It has to be hidden. It has to be hidden. And that's a nature of the people of Pisces. You never know what's going inside them. They're always secretive. It's like they jump deep into the ocean, and in the depths nobody can see what's going on. Usually the eyes can tell. You look at somebody's eyes, and the eyes can tell everything that they go through. You look at the eyes of a Pisces, that's one of the ways to tell somebody's a Pisces. You see haze, no entry, can't go and look inside. That's Pisces. So the letter Gimel is the letter of sharing the bliss, and that's why whatever is under the control of the planet Jupiter has that nature of abundance. And the Rabbi Avraham ben David of Poskiris, some 1,000 years ago, wrote a commentary to the book of Formation, one of the most famous commentaries, and he's saying that Jupiter, the letter Gimel, has the power of peace from the force of Chesed, loving kindness, and he's responsible. That planet is responsible for grace, honesty, justice, humility, and good deeds, good name, and people of good name, loyalty, wisdom of the Torah, and also bliss and success in negotiations. That's why it's a good month for negotiations and starting businesses. And also success in every business, profits and wealth, because he has Jupiter, the money and good hopes, which bring money, of grace, happiness, and marriage. And that's why when we go into the month of Pisces, this is a time to rejoice. This is the energy of joy and happiness. When can a person feel joy and happiness? It's when he feels the bliss around him. This is the opportunity to connect to bliss. However, we said there's always free will. Pisces is a month of sensitivity. It's a water sign. And Pisces are very sensitive. Like all the other water signs, the sensitivity can destroy them, sensitivity can build them and bring them to the top of success. How? When a person is not spiritual and is sensitive, whatever happens, they feel it. You know, when you meet somebody, you ask, how do you feel? And what people do most of the time in our society, they always think about, how do I feel? How do I feel? How do I feel? And when we learn Kabbalah, we understand that when you're focused on how do I feel, you're so selfish, you're so self-centered, you are in the end of the chain. And when you connect to the end, you're not connected to the endless, which is the bliss of the creation, the bliss of the Creator, the symbol of the letter Gimel. You're disconnected. The only way to connect to bliss is to be sensitive to others, to feel what they feel. Do not own that. That's selfish. You know, many people think that when I see somebody suffering and I stand by and I feel his misery and I go through the guilt of feeling his misery and I empathize with his misery, then I'm exempt because I feel the misery. No, fool. Don't be a fool. You feel somebody's misery? Get up and do something about it. If two people will become miserable instead of one, just because you empathize with that person, how would the world become a better world? Would guilt help the world to become a better place? Would guilt make you more connected to the light of God? No. So who needs that? You don't need it. Get rid of it. When you feel somebody else's pain, the first question you have to ask is, what can I do to help that person? To get out of my comfort zone and help. Why did I say comfort zone? The letter Gimel is very dangerous. It gives you always the feel of bliss, and that means you become complacent. You don't move. A lot of Pisceans do not move. They simply don't move. Why should I? I'm connected to the letter Gimel. I'm connected to Jupiter. I feel the bliss in my arteries and my veins and my blood. You want to connect to real bliss? Share. Share it with others. That's the only way that bliss can be manifested. Through actions, through words. Sensitivity has to go from understanding somebody's pain, connecting it to the light, and moving to action. That's the difference between spirituality and stupidity. When you do that, you have power, because you have the energy to move on. In the book of Esther, when Mordecai hears about a disaster coming, he sits and cries and he mourns. Esther, Queen Esther, sends to him a message, what are you doing? And he says that the disaster is coming. He says, don't waste the time, move, get out, go. Get all the Jews together and make them pray and unite and share with each other. Sitting and crying won't help anyone. Big message for Pisceans. The letter that controls, according to the Book of Formation, controls the sign of Pisces, not the planet that controls Pisces. The sign of Pisces is the letter Kuf, which is the only letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the biblical alphabet, that goes under the line. There's a long line, the Kuf has a long leg going under the line, symbolized giving power to the dark side. Why should we give power to the dark side? And the answer is, when I sense the dark side, I can tell its moves much ahead of time. Sensitivity is the key for success. By sensing others and understanding how to put them in the right place, how to face them, how to interact with them. And this is the gift that people of Pisces have. Use it. This is the gift that we have during the month of Pisces. Loving the other person as I love myself. How do you know how to do that? You have to sense that person. Acquire that quality. This is the month that we can either acquire the quality or improve, upgrade the quality of sensitivity. Then we can be happy. Have a great month.
So that was a powerful testimony. Some great insight. Thoughts, reflections on that?
Yeah. You know, I tell you, we can actually feel and sense the shift from a time of concealment and really having to be very quiet for a season, and then coming into Adar, it's we can feel almost like you're being born, like you're being born again, and there's like things, more opportunities, there's light, but it's also a very how can I say, spiritually, it's also a very unique place, whereas you really have to be very sensitive. I personally, I feel more excited about this time, about this transition, but it also feels like I want to be very cautious and careful in this moment. It's kind of like when a baby's being born, it's a very, very sensitive time, because when that child is being born, you want to make sure that child is facing the right direction. You want to make sure that child is well. You're checking, the doctors are checking the heartbeat of the mother. That it's a very intense time, okay, but yet also a very private time. Everybody's not in that waiting room. Everybody's not in the labor delivery room with the mother and the child. You see, and so you have your midwife there, and the wife. They're giving, they're in that birthing place, and so there's something great going on behind closed doors, and everyone on the outside is awaiting this, and everybody's excited, but yet also there's this feeling of like, hey, make it through. You gotta pull it through. Come on, come on, come on. And so this is a very sensitive time, and I never really viewed it like that. And so I can appreciate why the Sanhedrin would develop a calendar and a system, because amongst Hebrew Israelites, there's a lot of calendars being followed, a whole lot of calendars being followed. And I think I talked to you about this when we first met, that there was a brother that was, he was, he had just got done with Yom Kippur like a month before, I'm getting ready to go into Yom Kippur. And I was like, man, like you weren't concerned that, about whether or not I was keeping Yom Kippur, but make a long story short, these calendars and just this understanding of these transitions and how they're connected, because they are connected with the environment around us, with our lives, our personal lives, our family lives, our marriages, our children. And it just, if we connect with these things, we will, I believe that we'll make better decisions. We'll have more discernment across the world, across the globe. Jews all over the world will be able to capture what's going on instead of being behind the eight ball, Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem was thinking about how the when he was talking about the evil eye and the fish or whatnot. It just brought me to something that a lot of I know a lot of Black communities, they would say when someone would dream about fish that a little one, a baby was going to be born, and so you would think about that, like, what is the connection, with the fish? So I just kind of was wondering if you'd ever heard of that, but that's what I kind of was thinking about, that. And then also the portion where he was speaking about not caring, like you have somebody who's in pain or going through a suffering, and then you are saying, oh, I feel that pain, I feel that suffering, but not actually doing anything about it. It's like, when you think about that, that is like really like clearly just selfishness and a level of just, it's like somebody who is like, oh yeah, I see what you're going through, but yet you don't really take the time to extend yourself in that situation. I'm not saying that every time somebody's going through something that if it's something financial that you can help or whatever, but I mean, I'm sure there's something you possibly could do. A lot of hands extended could probably make the work a lot lighter, but I don't know, that just was something that really stood out to me, and just the part about the fish.
Yeah, no. So on both points, those are definitely head on. And the thing is not just for sure the information, but also the process of deliverance, right? Because there's a lot of way to deliver that idea, and we covered a lot of ground in probably 20 minutes, right? And what I'm saying is when you talk to people, these concepts, right? The concepts, the building blocks. It's like knowing every detail is great, especially in academia, right? Because you have tests. But in the spiritual world, everybody understands things in a unique way, right? And we want to be able to not to get in touch with that, right? To get in touch with the fact that how I communicate and how I learn. Because when it comes to transferring the information, you're ultimately sharing energy, right? And so this is a way that I, thought like, hey, if I wanted to open the conversation with somebody who had a basic understanding, I'm not saying a person who just is ignorant, but I'm saying a person has a basic understanding, how would I bring it up in 15, 20 minutes that I could talk about the calendar, I could talk about the month, and then I could talk about a deeper insight of it. And then from there, I could build into my own discussion. Right. Okay. So that's on that point. So let's keep going. So we're back in the leadership mode with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He should be with us. We're preparing for Pesach. Now's the time to increase Torah. Some people learn different things. Right now we're in the frame of leadership. So let's keep going. Okay. All right. So what we're doing, we're now on the fourth. Just as a reminder, so in the beginning, we started this conversation with saying that the first three Parsha Noah, Parsha Bereshit, and Parsha Noah, we have three different situations of not the opposite of leadership, right? This whole series that that Jonathan Sachs is teaching us is around leadership. And he shows us the first three Parsha, you can see clear examples of non-leadership, right? And that should be a big concept to our own personal development, right? Because if this Torah is starting off showing the development of man in this way and then having an objective for man, right? Then that should let us know that the mistakes that we think that we made in the past or the shortcomings that we expressed in the past is actually a natural form of development, right? It's a natural form of development for us to not take responsibility in our homes, whatever that means, right? It means something different for everybody else. Not taking responsibility with my brother, whatever that means. Not taking responsibility for my broader community, right? And that could mean something different for different people in different situations. But nevertheless, I could self-critique myself and say, hey, you know what? I can relate to Adam in that way. I can relate to Noah in that way. I mean, I could relate to Cain in that way, right? And I could relate to Noah, right? I could relate to all these different people. So those aspects are there that Hashem wants us to pull those things out of us and for us to see these aspects of limitation that we're naturally born with. But people who are at a much higher level and closer to Hashem than we were struggle with it. So here we go. We're on Lekha. And so at this point, this character, Abraham, his father, and other people were introduced to us. Sarah Lot. Yeah. Okay. So it says like this. Lekha, the courage not to conform. Okay. So that's the title, not to conform. So let's try to understand what this means. He says, leaders lead. That does not mean to say that they do not follow. But what they follow is different from what the most people follow. They do not conform for the sake of conformity. They do not do what others do merely because of the voices, because of because others are doing it, or merely because others are doing it. They follow an inner voice, a call. They have a vision not of what is, but what might be. They think outside the box and march to a different tune. Never was it more dramatically signaled in the first words of God to Abraham, in the words that set the Jewish history in motion. Leave your land, your birthplace, your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. And then it says this in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. So he asks a question. Who asked the question? Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And so he asks a question. He says, why? He says, because people do conform. They adopt a standard and absorb the culture of the time and place in which they live. Your land. At the deeper level, they are influenced by their friends and your neighbors. Your birthplace. Still, deeply still, that they are shaped by their parents and their family in which they grew up. Your father's house, right? He says, you want to say, God, he said, I want you, says God to Abraham, to be different, not for the sake of being different, but for the sake of starting something new. A spiritual system that will not worship power and symbols of power. That is what the idols really were and are. I want you, says God, to teach your children in your household afterwards to follow the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. It says in Genesis 8, chapter 18, verse 19. He says to be a Jew is to be a Jew is willing to challenge the prevailing consensus when as so often happens, nations sip into worshiping the old gods. He says they did so in Europe throughout the 19th century and through the 20th century. That was the age of nationalism, the pursuit of power in the name of nation state that led to two world wars and tens of millions of deaths. It was the age, he said, it is the age we're living in now as North Korea acquires and Iran pursues nuclear weapons so that they can impose their ambitions by force. It it is what is happening today throughout the Middle East and Africa as nations descend into violence and what Hables calls the war of every man against every man. He says we make the mistake when we think idols in terms of their physical appearance, statues and figureness and icons. In that sense, they belong to the ancient times of what we have long outgrown. Instead, the right away, so he's about to drop a bombshell, right? Because like when we think about idols and idol worship, we think about they had this like doll with dreadlocks and this eye or this kneecap, whatever it is, and they worshipped it. But he's saying that was in the past. He says right away. He said instead the right way to think of idols is in terms of what they represent, the symbol, the symbolized power. That is what Ra was for the Egyptians, what Baal was for the Canaanites, and what Kisrosh was for the Moabites, and what Zeus was for the Greeks, and what the missiles and the bombs are for the terrorists in rogue states today. Interesting saying that, right? He says the power allows us to rule over others without consent. As the Greeks historians Titus put it, the strong do what they wish and the weak suffer what they wish. Judaism is a sustained critique of power. That is the conclusion I have reached after a lifetime of studying our scarce texts. It is about how a nation can be formed on the basis of a shared commitment and collective responsibility. It's an interesting point, right? Shared commitment and collective responsibility. It is about how to construct a society that honors the human person as the image and likeness of God. It is about a vision never fully realized but never abandoned of a world based on justice and compassion, in which they will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountains, for the earth will be fulfilled with knowledge and the Lord, he's quoting, it says in Isaiah, he says, and the Lord will be, it says, and the earth will be filled of knowledge, and the Lord as the water covers the sea. All right. So we're kind of like going through it because I know that you guys get it. You guys are listening and you guys are thinking. So I don't have to give a play by play. But the thing is just thinking about like, what is this concept of idols that he's speaking about in 2025? What is an idol? How do we understand it, right? And the tradition that I've learned on what an idol is, the tradition that I've learned is that an idol is anything that you use to get energy from, other than the creator. So, for example, like there's an energy with getting attention, right? So a person goes out and they buy like really expensive stuff, diamonds, all this stuff. Maybe a outfit, for women that's like, very revealing, whatever, but they're getting energy, right? They get everyone's attention, they get people's opinions or people's, thoughts based put on them, and they feel this sense of like, they feel connected, right? They're like, yeah, everyone's paying attention to me. That desire to achieve that connection of energy through that source and not going to the ultimate source or the true source, that would be like an idol, right? A person with their status, like, hey, I'm a chief rabbi, I'm better than other people. I'm higher level. I'm higher level. So now they're saying because of a title, I'm better than someone else, right? I am different than other human beings. That perception, that's an idol. I'm a successful businessman. I'm a multimillionaire. I'm a billionaire. It's an idol. I have a Birkin bag. I have these. I have Gucci cutlery. I'm saying whatever it is for anybody, right? There's different levels. Spiritual people have their thing. Everyone has their thing. People, working class, owners, all these different things. Everyone has a particular challenge, but the base principle of these challenges is is basically to be able to analyze the situation, for what it is, right? And what am I trying to get out of it? What is my objective? I want to feel good. Okay, so I'm going to go to cosmetic surgery and to feel better. And I don't believe that connecting to the light force or life force of the creator is going to fulfill the lacks that I'm having in my life. I'm going to go and take it upon my hands because I've seen all these people of another nation do the same exact thing, and it made them happy. So you know what? I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do cosmetic surgery. It made them happy. It'll make me happy. This is the idol, right? The idol is anything that you go to for sustenance other than the creator, right? Other than the creator, just everything else is just complete. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, he says Abraham, without doubt, was the most influential person who ever lived. Today, he is claimed as a spiritual ancestor, just as a spiritual ancestor of 2.4 billion Christians, 1.6 billion Christians, and 13 million Jews, more than half of the people alive today. Yet he ruled no empire, commanded no great army, performed no great miracles, and proclaimed no prophecy. He he is the supreme example of all of the history of the influences without. He is the supreme example of all of history of influence without power. Influence without power, a concept we must study more closely in our conclusion of Parsha Bishalocha. Okay, this is why he says because he prepared to be different. The sages say he was called an Ivri, a Hebrew, because all the world was on the other side. Be'ever echad. And he says, and he was on the other side, and he was on the other. Leadership, as every leader knows, it can be lonely. Yet you continue to do what you have to do because you know that the majority is not always right, and and conventional wisdom is not always wise. Dead fish go with the flow. Live fish swim against the current. So is it as with conscious or a conscience. He says the conscience and courage. I don't know if that means conscience. Maybe I say right. Anyways, he says it is. It says so. It is with the children of Abraham. They are prepared to challenge the idols of the age. So he's saying this is a theme. This whole idea of like resistance, falsity. In Hebrew, they use the word sheker. Things just false solutions, false ways. Hey, if you get these degrees, you're going to be happy. If you go to this university, you're educated. It's not true. So he says, after the Holocaust, some social science were haunted by the question as to why many people prepared, whether by the active participation or silent consent, to go along with a regime that they knew committed one of the greatest crimes against humanity. One experiment was concluded by Solomon whatever, and he says he assembled a group of people asking them to perform a series of simple cognitive tasks, and they were shown two cards, one with a line on it and another with three lines on it of different lengths. He says he asked which of the lines on the second card is the same. Hold on 1 second. Somebody's coming in. All right. Sorry about that. I'm just kind of like leaning. I'm like reading. Okay. Cool. All right. So he's bringing a study, right? And so basically what we're going through right now is this idea of Lekha, right? And Lekha is a byproduct of the earlier Parshiyot that talk about Adam, Chava, Cain, and Noah not taking responsibilities at different levels. And I guess we're learning about this. So again, we're learning. We see a consistent theme that Rabbi. We see a consistent theme that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he likes to bring a lot of modern day studies of human behavior to understand it, which kind of gives an insight to the audience he speaks to as well. He assembled a group of people asking them to perform a series of simple cognitive tasks. They were shown two cards on one with a line on it and one with three lines on it of different lengths. And they asked which of the lines of the second card was the same length as the line of the first card. Unbeknownst to one participant, all the others have been briefed by the they were both briefed by the scientists to give the right answer for the first few cards, then wrong ones for most of the rest. On the significant numbers of association, the subject gave an answer. The subject gave an answer he could see was wrong because everyone else had done so. So he's talking about this idea. Why is he bringing this point? Like why is he specifically bringing this idea? Because he's showing us about the idea of groupthink, right? And how like so many people can go into this idea of groupthink, right? Everybody believes this, everybody does that, everybody lives this way. This is what I am. I fit into this groupthink, and this is what I'm doing. But then the problem is, what if you have a different desire level of your soul? And you have the ability to do things greater than the souls around you, and you don't do it. That could be called suffering, right? Okay. It says, such is the power of pressure to conform. It can lead us to say what we know is untrue. More frightening still was the Stanford experiment. The Stanford experiment carried out in the early 1970s by Philip Zimbardo. The student participants were randomly assessed roles as guards or prisoners in a mock prison, Within days, the students cast as guards were behaving abusively, some of them subjecting the prisoners to psychological torture. The students cast as prisoners put up with this passively, even sliding with the guards against their own, even against those who resistance. So so there's this kind of like this idea of saying like, hey, this is what everybody thinks is the thing. I feel connected to that, and so the people who resist, I'm the first one to do it, right? And you see that. I'm just going to be real about it. You see that in African American spaces. You know, it's like a lot of people, like you talk about like the chief Robin Hood of Africa, right? And it's just like, the biggest opposition we've had has been from other Black Jews, whether they're African or African American, a lot of African Americans. And you're like, and I'm talking about people who like have come to Israel, people have learned, and you say like, well, why do you have a problem with the chief Robin Hood of Africa? Like why would you have a problem with that? Rabbi Pinchas already had a yeshiva in the old city of Jerusalem, right? Everyone knew about it. It was a famous place. I learned there, right? And so everyone knew about it. So him doing this, it's not like some guy came out of nowhere. We know Rabbi Pinchas, we know his family, and he lived in the old city. So what's the point? And more than that, the chief rabbinate of Africa is dealing with the communities inside of Africa that identify as Jewish, that the mainstream Jewish community doesn't even know how to deal with them. You know what I'm saying? He's taking work nobody else wants to do. And someone's mad at that? Oh, well, you know what? The people who voted for him were all people that were connected to him. But there's never been a Robin Hood of Africa. There's never been anyone who's even attempted to take on such an endeavor. So what are you talking about? Like, what would the tribes, what would even organize all the tribes and every single individual and create what are you talking about? So anyway, so the point is just saying that the Chief Rabbin of Africa and the Chief Rabbin Pinchas is a reminder of this idea of breaking away. The opposite of what we're reading now. The idea of seeing something wrong, seeing something missing, and doing something about it. That's what we've been learning this week, no? Right? We've been learning this principle all week is that, hey, you know what? We have to be able to be in a place where we can see what's wrong and do something about it. That's being Avraham Avinu. That's being a Jew. To make changes in the world, to say this is not right, this is what we should do, and have such a sense of concern for all of humanity, like a king, like a queen. Maybe that's what Shabbat is training us for. Shabbat is saying, no, you are the king and the queen of your worlds. When people get married, they join their worlds together. So you are the king and queen there. You are the Esther and Mordecai. You are the Abraham and Sarah, right? And you guys got to make so we dress up in our best clothes and we sit at the table and we eat in a royal way. But why do we do these things? Perhaps the reason why we do these things is to act out a sense of social responsibility that we have during the week. We have Shabbat in a royal way, not because we want to, emulate the non-Jews and their fancy meals and their gluttony. No, because if we could take on that responsibility of being a king and a queen and everything being served for you and everything's there and you're in line with God, maybe we could act it out in real life. Okay. So he says, that's why Abraham, at the start of his mission, was told to leave his land, his birthplace, his father's house, to free himself from the pressures to conform. Leaders must prepare not to follow the consensus. One of the great writers on leadership, Warren Bennis, writes, at the time we reach puberty, the world has shaped us to a greater extent than we realize. Our family, our friends, our society, in general, that have told us the word and an example how to be. But people begin to become leaders at the moment when they decide for themselves how to be. I knew this designer. His name was Hedy Slimane. He was a really big designer. Okay, you know what? I don't know. I just had this intuition that said, is he the one who said it, or was it someone else? It was around the time that I was working for this guy, Hedi Shemaine, who's a very big designer. So, whole story, I was working with him. I used to write for Vogue Japan magazine, fashion, street fashion type of stuff. So, I don't know if it was him who said it, but someone else said it. But basically, everyone has a look, right? Everyone has a look. And if a person is able to tap into what that look is, they'll never have to worry about fashion again in their life because they'll just buy clothes for the look. And I remember there was times years ago when I was really way more into fashion that people would call me and be like, "Are you at this restaurant?" I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Oh my God, I see a guy who looks just like you." I'm like, "What are you talking about? You see some guy that like me?" And they'll send me a picture, right? And I'm like, "Oh wow, okay, same outfit, right? Same body, black guy, a little bit husky, whatever, and he got the same Apple hat, whatever." But the point is just saying that when we look at what's going on over here, we're looking at this idea of finding who we are is defining who we are. You don't have to. It's not about going and searching, right? Oh, I got to go here. I got to go here. I got to go to this place. I got to search. I got to go to Israel. Oh, I got to find out. No. Okay, it's nice. You come to Eretz Israel. It's a beautiful thing. But the point is saying that. Thank God, right? Thank God for the nation of Israel. But the point is just saying that what we're talking about here is this idea of taking accountability that I determine my destiny. I determine what's going on. I get it that I grew up in my this particular land. I get it that I grew up in my parents' house. I get it. All these things that shape my personality, shape who I am, and that's why it's hard for people to accept that I converted to Judaism. They think it has to be some ulterior motive, right? You must be making money. The Jews are rich, right? They gave you $100 million, right? They give you 10 million. They give you something, right? What they give you? It's hard for people to accept that. No, we have the power to determine our lives, and if we make changes that are completely different than our environment, it doesn't come from a place of deprivation. Did I need some other people? If I got involved in Judaism because of other Jews, that would be idol worship. That's idol worship. I came in because I want to be with these people and I could and there's some opportunity. No, God creates the opportunities. Wait, we forget that? God creates my money. It don't matter if you're Jewish and Muslim, Christian, whatever you are. You are a righteous person and you do good and you give and you are a giver. You will be a part of the spiritual universe. You will have divine inspiration, right? It's not something exclusively for the Jews. The Jews have an exclusive mission, right? He says one reason that the Jews become out of all proportions to their numbers, leaders in almost every aspect of humans' endeavors is precisely this willingness to be different. Throughout the centuries, Jews have been the most striking example of a group that refused to assimilate to dominant culture or to convert to dominant faith. And he says, on the other hand, he says another finding of Solomon, Aska, I guess. Solomon Aska is worth nothing. Just if just one person is willing to support the individual who could see that the others were giving the wrong answer, it gave him the strength to stand out against the consensus. This is why, however small their numbers, Jews create communities. It's hard to lead alone, far less, far less hard to lead in the company of others, even if you are a minority. And he says Judaism is the counter voice in the conversation of mankind. As Jews, we do not follow the majority merely because it's a majority. In the age after age, century after century, Jews are prepared to do what the poet Robert Frost immortalized. He reads to Robert. This is so modern Orthodox. Okay, so Robert Frost says like this. He said, "Two roads diverge." This is a poem. Robert Frost. Everyone read him in school, right? The two roads diverge in a wood. and I took one less and I took the one less traveled, and that made me all the difference. It is what makes a nation, and he leads with his point. It is what makes a nation of leaders. So that's his point on Lekha. Please, thoughts, reflections. As you know, I'm like, as I'm listening to you, I'm waiting to hear like every siren is like, is that another missile coming down? Anyways, but we're good. We're moving forward. So thoughts, reflections, anybody? Seems like there's a little bit of technical difficulties. Anyways, we'll continue on tomorrow, Friday, schmooze. We're going to keep pushing it. We're in the frame of building towards Pesach, to growing, to elevating. Are you there?
Yeah, I don't know what happened just now.
Okay.
You know, I think that, you know, from what I'm hearing, just, you know, even with Chief Rabbi Pincus, it's one of those things to whereas we are in a place where we really cannot even be, you know, it's interesting that people find the time to fight against what you're trying to do or what you're trying to accomplish, right? And not understanding that that's actually taken away from their journey, right? It's literally taken away from what they should be doing in life. Um, the whole aspect of why we make the decisions that we're making, you know, Lekha OG has a really nice song. It's called Trendsetters, right? And the hook of it is that, you know, hey, some call it trendy, we call it talkless, which means, you know, we call it its purpose, you know. So serving God, serving Hashem is not a trend, but this we don't have a choice. You know, we don't have a choice. Chief Rabbi Pincus, he doesn't have a choice. This is what he was called to do. This is what he was designed to do. And so, much like that designer, obviously that's the road that he chose to go down. And you know, the idea is that this is the road that chose us. So as we continue, we're gonna find probably that there's so many people that have so many issues, not realizing that the one thing that they criticize is the very thing that they probably need. And that's why their eyes have been drawn to it. You know, who knows? Some of these people that criticize or they want to work against, you know, it's because they need to make some corrections, and because they don't want to make those corrections, they're gonna come back. It's gonna come back, and they're gonna have to make those corrections one way or the other.
No, Bruker's show. Um, Very deep points. Very deep points. And yeah, like you said, it's a calling, right? And it's not something you know could really choose and this type of thing. And even when we talk about a lot of the Robin stuff, you know, these are discussions that we were having, you know, like 3 years ago, right? Like everything, how we could look, this, the structures, the dynamics, all this, you know. So, you know, we'll see what God's plan is. You know, like I was saying yesterday, you know, when we talk about this idea of the videos that we saw yesterday about the man planning the whole village, you know, is being able to basically say, like, you know, all we got to do is plant the seeds, you
That's
know,
right.
and let Hashem do the rest, and keep planting, you know, and just keep planting, you know, and those and whatever Hashem wants them to be is that, and that's how you're able to move fast and cover a lot of ground and not let your ego or your own self agenda get involved, right? Because you just said, hey, my connection's to the light. I plant, I keep moving. I plant, I keep moving. I plant, I keep moving until we cover a whole situations, and then now it's functioning on its own, and other entities are coming towards it because there's an ecosystem. You know what I mean? But that's the ultimate thing, because you just want to stand in front of Hashem and say, hey, I did it, you know, for your sake. I didn't do it with an agenda. You know, I didn't, you know, I wasn't looking for personal gain. I didn't want any. I just, I want to connect to you. Anyways, all right. So let's continue on tomorrow. Um, probably around like 15, 16 type of a thing. But we'll confirm earlier. I'll make sure I do it earlier. And we'll just keep going. Uh, Shabbat Shalom tomorrow anyways. Baruch atah Adonai, Le'olam, Amen.